The fire had eaten the cabin down to its bones. Only blackened beams jutted up from the snow, like ribs of some great beast that had died in the night. Smoke still curled faintly from the wreckage, carrying with it the bitter smell of pine tar and scorched earth. The Montana wind swept through the hollow, pushing the smoke low and stinging the eyes of anyone who dared look too close. At the edge of the ruin lay a girl. Her dress was ragged, her skin streaked with soot, and her hands were bound as though whoever set the fire had wanted to be certain she could not crawl free. She stirred once, weakly, then lay still, her breath shallow, lost somewhere between the living and the gone. Up on the ridge, a lone rider reined in his horse. The drifter wasn't one for stopping. He had learned long ago that a man who lingered too long in another's grief risked drowning in it himself, but something in the way the wind carried that thin, broken sound, a cough maybe, or a whisper, pulled him down from the saddle. Boots crunching through crusted snow, he stepped into the clearing. His eyes scanned the wreckage, then fell upon her. For a moment he just stood there, hat brim shadowing his face, the weight of choice heavy as the smoke itself. The cabin was gone. Whoever left her here wanted her gone too. But the drifter had seen enough of the world to know when fate had set something in his path. He knelt beside her, brushing away ash that clung to her hair. Her skin was cold, lips cracked, eyes half shut against the ruin. He loosened the ropes that bit into her wrists, his fingers steady, though his jaw clenched. Her voice, barely more than breath, escaped. "Don't leave me." The drifter did not answer right away. He just slipped his coat from his shoulders, a heavy, trail-worn duster lined with wool, and laid it over her body, wrapping her as though against the fire's memory itself. The night was coming. Wolves would stir soon, and whatever had burned this cabin down might not be far behind. The drifter looked once at the horizon, then back at her. Whatever road he thought he was walking had ended here. The girl stirred under the weight of the coat, a faint tremor shivering through her frame. The drifter slid an arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her enough to help her breathe. Her head lolled against his chest, her cheeks streaked with soot. "Easy now," he murmured, though his voice was gravel from too many years on the trail. Her lips moved, forming words he could barely catch. Everything gone. He glanced at the ruin again. The fire hadn't just been spiteful, it had been deliberate. Someone had doused the timbers with kerosene. He could smell it in the frozen air, sharper than the pine. This wasn't lightning or accident, this was cleansing, erasure. The drifter pulled his canteen from his saddlebag and tipped it gently to her mouth. The water ran slow, catching against her cracked lips before she swallowed weakly. A cough rattled her chest, but when it passed, her eyes opened the faintest bit more. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as though memory itself was a wound. Finally, in a hoarse whisper, "Clara." "All right, Clara," he said, steady, like he was setting a post in the ground. "You ain't staying here." He slid his arms beneath her and lifted her up. She was light, too light, and the way her head fell against his shoulder spoke of days without food or warmth. His coat slipped tighter around her as he carried her toward the horse waiting on the ridge. The gelding stamped, uneasy at the scent of smoke, but the drifter spoke low and calm, steadying the animal. He settled Clara against the saddle, mounting behind her so she was cradled against his chest. The trail ahead was long, and the snow was thickening as dusk sank low, where over the valley. Behind him, the burned cabin gave one last sigh of smoke before the wind carried its ashes away. He didn't know who had left her there, or why. He only knew one thing with certainty: someone had meant for her to die. And now, because fate had shoved her into his arms, someone would have to answer for it. The horse started forward, hooves crunching through snow and ash alike. Each mile carried them further from the ruin, deeper into the cold, and closer to the reckoning that waited somewhere ahead. The trail out of the valley was no trail at all, just a rough cut through scattered pine and frost-bitten sage. The drifter urged the gelding steady, one arm keeping Clara against him while the other held the reins loose but sure. Her weight was so slight he feared she'd slip away into the dark without a sound if he wasn't careful. The snow eased for a spell, though the air was bitter enough to sting the inside of his nose. He rode in silence, ears tuned to every creak of leather, every snap of twig beneath the horse's hooves. The wilderness here wasn't friendly at the best of times. Tonight it carried a feeling worse than wolves or cold. It felt watched. Clara stirred against his chest, the faintest movement, her head rolling enough that he could hear her whisper, "Don't go back." "I won't," he said, his voice a low promise. But her words dug at him. She hadn't begged for food or water. She hadn't asked where he was taking her. The first thing she told him was, "Don't go back," as if something more than fire waited there in the ashes. He glanced behind. The smoke was a smear against the star-streaked sky, miles back already, but still rising. Whoever lit that cabin hadn't done it quietly. Fire was a beacon, one meant to signal as much as to destroy. The drifter pressed Clara tighter against him. "We'll make camp soon," he muttered, though he wasn't certain if he was talking to her or himself. He steered them toward a cleft in the ridge where old pines bent low, their branches heavy with snow, the earth beneath them shielded from the worst of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was cover. He swung down, keeping Clara in his arms, and laid her gently on his saddle blanket before setting to work. His hands moved quick, gathering deadfall, splitting it against a stone, coaxing a spark into flame. Soon a small fire licked at the wood, throwing back shadows. He knelt close, feeding the blaze, his eyes darting to Clara. Her face in the flicker looked younger than he'd guessed at first, no more than 20, though her eyes, when they opened, were older, carved by something harsher than years. She watched him a long while before speaking. "You shouldn't have stopped." The drifter paused, a branch in his hand. "If I hadn't, you'd be gone by morning. That's what they wanted." "Who?" Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Men. Not from here. They came 2 nights ago. Said my father owed them. Money. Land. I don't even know. He tried to reason, but they—" Her voice trailed and her gaze shifted to the fire. "They lit the walls while we were still inside." The drifter's jaw set. "Your father?" She turned her face away, slow. "Didn't make it out." The fire cracked. The silence that followed was heavy, only the horse shifting nearby to break it. The drifter felt something coil inside him, not surprise exactly, but a recognition. He'd seen that kind of cruelty before, men who believed the land and the people on it could be taken with fire, with iron, with fear. He'd seen it, and he'd put some of them in the ground. He reached over, pulling his coat tighter around Clara's shoulders. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew it was only half true. She wasn't safe. Not with men like that alive, roaming close enough to burn a cabin and leave her for dead. The night deepened. He fed the fire, listening to the wind drag across the canyon walls. Somewhere out there, a coyote called, high and lonely. But beneath it, softer, the drifter thought he caught something else. The faint pop of a horse's hoof on rock, carried thin on the air. He froze. Clara's eyes found his. She didn't ask what he'd obeyed. Heard. She already knew. The drifter moved quiet, reaching for the rifle strapped across his saddle. He eased it into his lap and sat with his back to the fire, so its glow wouldn't blind him to the dark. If the men who burned that cabin were out there, they'd seen the smoke. Maybe they were watching now, waiting for the right moment to move. The drifter's jaw tightened. He wasn't the sort to wait. Still, he stayed put, rifle laid across his knees, Clara breathing faint and ragged under his coat. The fire crackled, the shadows stretched, and in the silence between the wind and the flames, he thought again of what Clara had whispered first. "Don't go back." No. There was no going back. But there was one thing he could do. He could make damn sure the men who left her to die never lit another fire again. And as the night wore on, he knew with cold certainty, come dawn, the hunt would begin. Dawn bled slow across the canyon, turning the sky the color of ash and rust. The drifter had not slept. He sat with his rifle laid across his knees, watching the fire burn down to embers, every sense strung taut like wire. Clara had drifted in and out of shallow sleep, her breathing rasping, each breath pulling him back from the edge of weariness. When the sun finally cracked the ridge, he rose. He stamped out the fire, scattered the coals with the heel of his boot, then moved to saddle the gelding. Clara stirred, lifting her head weakly from the blanket. Where are we going?" "Farther from here." His voice was clipped. "Smoke draws eyes." Her lips pressed tight as though she wanted to argue, but she only nodded. The drifter lifted her into the saddle before swinging up behind her, his arms steadying her small frame against him. The canyon floor stretched wide and empty as they rode, but the drifter kept scanning the brush and the ridges above. He had spent too many hours in country like this not to know how men lay in wait. A ridge could hide a dozen rifles, and silence could be as deadly as a shout. After a mile or so, he spotted it. Fresh sign, a line of horse tracks cutting across the sand leading east, more than one animal, maybe 3, maybe 4. The hoofprints were sharp, not more than a few hours old. Clara stiffened when she saw them too. "It's them," she whispered. The drifter's hand tightened on the reins. "Could be anyone." "No," she said, her voice trembling with certainty. "It's them. They ride together. Always." He studied the tracks again, his jaw tight. She might be right, and if she was, they were closer than he liked. Too close. He veered the horse off the canyon floor, guiding it toward the rocks and scrub that offered some cover. The gelding climbed steady, hooves clattering softly against stone. Clara held onto the saddle horn with weak hands, swaying against him. They climbed until the canyon opened into a shelf of land dotted with juniper and scattered stone. From here, the drifter had a view of the trail below. He pulled the horse to a stop and dismounted, helping Clara down onto a flat rock. "Rest here. What about you?" He checked the rifle, working the lever with a quiet click. "I need to see who we're dealing with." Her hand caught his sleeve. Her grip was small, weak, but insistent. "If they find you." "They won't." He laid her hand gently back against the blanket he'd wrapped her in. "Stay low." The drifter crouched along the rim, moving like a shadow between rocks. He lay flat near the edge, his eyes fixed on the canyon floor. It didn't take long. 4 riders came into view, their horses moving at an easy walk. Their hats were pulled low, rifles slung careless across their saddles. These weren't hunters or travelers. These were the kind of men who rode with purpose and left fire behind them. The lead rider reined up, raising a hand. He turned in the saddle, speaking to the others. Though the drifter couldn't hear the words, he could read the meaning clear enough in their movements. The man pointed toward the smoke trail still faint against the horizon. The cabin, or what was left of it. Then his hand cut east, toward the canyon shelf, toward them. The drifter's breath left in a slow, steady stream. They were on the right trail, and they wouldn't stop until they finished what they'd started. He slid back from the rim and returned to Clara. Her eyes searched his face the moment he appeared, though he kept his expression hard and unreadable. "It's them," she said. He nodded once. 4. Clara's shoulders slumped, her body trembling under the coat. "You can't take 4 men alone." The drifter crouched beside her, his voice steady. "I've taken worse." "But why?" Her voice cracked. "You don't even know me." He held her gaze a long moment. Her eyes were wide, frightened, but under that fear there was a spark, something stubborn, unbroken, even after fire and death. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. "Because," he said at last, "a man doesn't ride past a fire and leave the living to the dead." She said nothing, but a single tear traced down her soot-streaked cheek. The drifter rose, his eyes sweeping the canyon. The riders would be here soon. He needed ground that favored 1 rifle over 4. He needed a place where the land itself could cut their number down. He looked west, where the canyon narrowed into a chute of rock no wider than a wagon. Steep walls, few places to run. A single man with a rifle could hold it, if he had the will. He turned back to Clara. "Can you ride?" She hesitated, then shook her head faintly. Then you'll stay hidden. When it's done, I'll come for you." Her lips parted as though to protest, but she said nothing. She only reached for his hand, gripping it tight for one heartbeat before letting go. The drifter pulled his hat low, checked the rifle once more, and mounted the geld, seeing his shadow stretched long across the stone as he turned toward the narrow chute. Behind him, Clara sat alone against the rock, the fire's ashes still clinging faintly to her hair. Ahead of him, death rode closer with every hoofbeat, and the drifter, he was riding straight toward it. The chute was narrower than he remembered from the last time he had ridden this country. The drifter guided the gelding into the shadow of the rocks, the air turning cool and still. The canyon walls rose sheer on either side, painted with scars of wind and water, a place that swallowed sound and carried echoes. He dismounted, boots crunching lightly on gravel, and tied the reins to a twisted juniper root jutting from the stone. The horse stamped once, uneasy, its ears flicking at the silence. The drifter set his rifle against the rock and studied the ground. Loose stone, high walls, and a natural bend where the canyon pinched even tighter. It was the kind of place an army would avoid, but one man who knew where to stand could make it count. He tested the walls with his eyes, searching for shadows, cracks, high ledges. A man could climb partway up and use the elevation, but it would cost him speed if he had to move. Better to use the bend. If the riders came single file, they'd have little room to spread out. He knelt, smoothing his hand across the dust. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The earth was still cool from the night. Tracks would show here like ink on parchment. He could read his enemy before they even came into view. From the rim above, the faint call of a crow broke the silence. The drifter looked up, narrowing his eyes. Crows circled death, and they were circling now. He worked quickly. He rolled a loose boulder near the bend and positioned himself behind it, setting his rifle across the stone. He pulled a second revolver from his belt and laid it beside him. Then he drew the knife from his boot, its edge worn silver with years of use. Every weapon had its place. And then he waited. Time slowed in places like this. A man's heartbeat filled his ears until it felt like a drum. He could feel each breath, slow and steady, the way he had trained himself in other lonely stretches of country where silence mattered more than steel. The wind shifted, hoofbeats. The drifter closed his eyes for a beat, counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm was clear, 4 horses moving steady, closing in. He glanced once toward the shelf of land where Clara lay hidden under the blanket, her figure no more than a shadow against the rock. She couldn't see him from there, but he knew she was listening, waiting. The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust rose at the far end of the chute. The first rider came into view, his horse's flanks slick with sweat, a rifle slung across the saddle horn. He rode casual, hat tipped forward, as though the land itself belonged to him. The drifter steadied his rifle, sighting down the barrel. One squeeze, and the man would fall before his companions even reached the bend. It would be clean, efficient. But something inside him held. Killing too soon might scatter the rest. They'd climb the rocks, circle wide, maybe stumble onto Clara's hiding place. So he waited. The second rider appeared, then the third, then the fourth, the last one glancing often behind them as though he suspected ghosts were trailing their horses. The drifter's finger brushed the trigger, but still he held. His mind ticked through every move, where the men would ride, where they'd dismount, what ground they'd choose if they suspected an ambush. Patience. Patience was the difference between a dead man and one who walked away. The lead rider reined up just short of the bend. He lifted his hand, signaling halt. His eyes scanned the canyon walls. His voice carried sharp against the stone. "Smoke's fresh. They passed through here." The second rider spat into the dust. "Where's the girl now, you think?" "Close," the leader muttered. "Too close to let her slip." The third rider laughed low, mean. "She won't slip. Not again." The drifter felt his jaw tighten. He could almost hear Clara's ragged breathing in his memory, the way she had whispered, "It's them." The leader swung down from his horse, his boots stirring the dust. He studied the tracks on the ground, squatting low. 1 horse, 2 riders. He looked up at the others, a cruel smile cutting across his face. He's carrying her. The drifter's heart slowed. They knew. He exhaled once, slow and quiet, and shifted his grip on the rifle. He had seen enough. Their voices carried cruelty like a stench. These were not men who would stop. The leader rose to his full height, dusting his hands. Spread out. Check the rocks. That was the moment. The drifter's finger curled, and the rifle barked thunder through the chute. The leader's hat flew from his head as he spun backward into the dust, a cry torn from his throat. Horses reared, men shouted, echoes crashing off the walls. The canyon had turned into a killing ground. And the drifter, he was the only thing standing between Clara and the four devils who hunted her. The rifle's cracks still echoed when dust boiled up around the fallen leader. His body twisted in the dirt, boots kicking once before going still. The other three riders shouted, spurring their horses sideways, scrambling for cover among the canyon walls. The drifter didn't waste time. He yanked the lever of his rifle, chambering the next round, eyes narrowing through the haze. One horse screamed as its rider jerked it too close to the wall, sparks flying from iron shoes on stone. Another shot thundered from his rifle, striking the rock just over the second rider's shoulder, spraying chips of stone. The man cursed and tumbled from the saddle, dragging his rifle free. The canyon rang with gunfire. Bullets sparked off the rocks near the drifter's cover, sharp pings that sent fragments biting into his cheek. He ducked low, teeth clenched, and counted the shots. 1, 2, 3. The third gunman was firing high and wild, nerves betraying him. That was the one to press. He rolled, propped the rifle over the boulder, and fired again. The bullet struck the horse, sending the beast screaming into a frenzy. It bolted down the chute, leaving its rider scrambling alone, weapon clattering into the dust. 2 left. The air reeked of powder, hot and sharp. Smoke hung between the walls, drifting low. The gelding tied behind him stamped and snorted, tugging against the reins. The drifter whispered a sharp command without turning, more to steady himself than the horse. From the rocks, a voice cut through. "You'll die for this, drifter." The reply was another shot, chipping stone an inch from his ear. He dropped the empty rifle and slid the revolver into his hand. Faster now. Close work. The second rider appeared at the bend, crouching low, revolver flashing. The drifter fired once, twice. The man staggered back, clutching his side, and disappeared into the smoke. The canyon went quiet, save for the ringing in his ears. Then, footsteps. Quick. Wrong side. The last rider had gone high. He'd climbed the rocks while the others pressed forward. The drifter spun, catching the flicker of movement along the wall above Clara's hiding place. His gut twisted cold. If the man crested the ledge, she was done. He fired, the shot sparking harmlessly off stone. The outlaw ducked low, scuttling higher like a wolf scenting its prey. "Clara!" the drifter roared. "Stay down!" He broke from cover, sprinting across the open ground, bullets chewing the dirt at his heels. His second revolver cleared the holster as he ran. He dove behind another outcrop, chest heaving. Dust filled his mouth, bitter as ash. From above, the outlaw laughed. "You should have kept her, stranger. We'd have found her anyway." The drifter's jaw clenched. He fired upward, forcing the man back, then scrambled higher along T. He rocks, his hands burned from the climb, knuckles raw. Halfway up, the world tilted with sound, Clara's cry sharp and terrified. He pulled himself over the ledge. The outlaw had Clara by the wrist, yanking her toward the edge. Her face was white with fear, hair wild against the smoke-filled sky. The rope around her ankles dragged behind her like a serpent. "Let her go," the drifter growled, revolver steady. The outlaw sneered, pressing his own pistol against Clara's temple. His eyes gleamed mean, teeth bared. "Drop it, or she goes over." The canyon seemed to hold its breath. The drifter's finger hovered on the trigger. Every instinct screamed to shoot, to end it before the man's cruelty could take root. But one twitch, one mistake, and Clara's body would tumble into the abyss. His voice came low, steady as the river stone beneath his boots. "You're already a dead man. Question is whether you fall now, or whether you walk a few more steps first." The outlaw's grip tightened on Clara. She whimpered, eyes locked on the drifters, begging without words. And then, movement at the corner of his vision, the wounded rider from below dragging himself up the rocks, revolver still clutched in bloody hands. 2 guns, 2 lives hanging in the balance. The drifter shifted his stance, every nerve screaming. Time slowed, dust swirled. The canyon was about to decide who walked away.